1 year ago, robots stumbled on a stage in China. They could barely walk. They kicked awkwardly. They twisted like broken toys. But this year, those same robots performed backflips. They spun in perfect sync. They moved with military precision. In just 12 months, they went from clumsy machines to something that looks almost human. And then another video appeared. Robots holding rifles, training like soldiers. Now, that video turned out to be fake. But here's the thing. Millions of people believed it instantly. Why? Because it felt inevitable. And that reaction alone tells us something about where this world is heading, something the Bible warned us about thousands of years ago. Let me show you what the world just witnessed. During China's Spring Festival Gala, the most watched television broadcast in that nation, something unusual unfolded before millions of viewers. Humanoid robots took center stage, not as props, not as background decoration, as performers. They lunged with precision. They spun without stumbling. They performed martial arts movements that would challenge trained athletes. And then they did something that made the watching world pause. They executed backflips, and they landed smoothly, without hesitation. Now here's what makes this significant. Just 12 months earlier, similar robots had appeared on that same stage. But their movements were different. They were stiff, mechanical, limited. They could walk, they could twist, they could perform basic kicks, but that was all. Compare that to what we saw this year. The balance improved, the coordination sharpened, the choreography became dramatically more complex. This was not gradual improvement. This was a leap. And when you see a leap like that in technology, you begin to understand something important. We are no longer living in a time of slow, steady progress. We are living in a time of acceleration. What once took decades now takes months. What once took years now takes weeks. Systems are learning faster, adapting faster, evolving faster. But here's the question no one seems to be asking. If robots can improve this quickly for entertainment, what else are they being prepared for? Almost immediately after that gala performance captured global attention, another video began circulating online, and this one carried a much darker tone. It showed humanoid robots holding assault rifles, moving in formation, appearing to train for combat scenarios. The imagery was chilling. Social media erupted. People shared it everywhere. Comments flooded in from around the world. Robot soldiers. The future of warfare. This is how it begins. And I'll be honest with you. When I first saw that video, something inside me stirred. A deep unease. A sense that we had crossed some invisible line. But then the truth came out. The video was fake. AI-generated, fabricated. So that settles it, right? Nothing to worry about. Just another internet hoax. Move on. But wait, here's what I cannot shake. Millions of people saw that video, and millions of people believed it instantly, without question, without hesitation. They believed it because it felt real. It felt possible. It felt like the next logical step. And that reaction, that immediate acceptance, tells us something profound. We are living in a world where armed robots no longer surprise us. We are living in a time where machine soldiers feel inevitable. We have already accepted in our minds what has not yet fully arrived in our reality. Think about that for a moment. The video was false, but the expectation was real. The technology isn't quite there yet, but our belief in its arrival is already complete. Now, why does that matter? Because throughout history, what people believe becomes possible often becomes actual. What society normalizes, society eventually builds. What the mind accepts, the hands create. And right now, the world is mentally prepared for something that would have seemed like science fiction just 10 years ago. Robots that don't just dance. Robots that enforce. Robots that patrol. Robots that control. But this still isn't the most unsettling part of the story, because there's an ancient book that described exactly this kind of system, thousands of years before the first robot was ever built. Now, let me say something very clearly before we go any further. I am not here to tell you that these robots are the system of the Antichrist. I am not claiming that this is exactly how prophecy will unfold. I am not declaring that machines will enforce the mark of the beast. With Bible prophecy, we must always approach interpretation with humility. History teaches us that even sincere believers can misunderstand how God fulfills His word. When Jesus Christ came the first time, many who knew the Scriptures missed Him entirely. Why? Because He did not come the way they expected. When they anticipated a conquering king, they received a suffering servant. They expected political dominance. They witnessed sacrificial redemption. If the first coming of Christ surprised people who studied prophecy daily, how much more should we be careful when discussing the final chapters of history? But here's the thing. While we must remain humble, we must also remain watchful. We must keep our eyes open. We must observe the patterns forming around us. And when I watched those robots, and when I saw that viral video of armed machines, my mind went immediately to the book of Revelation. Specifically, chapter 13. Let me read it to you. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak us and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now stop and think about what that passage describes. A global system, enforced worship, economic control, centralized authority, a structure so powerful that it governs commerce, loyalty, and survival itself. For centuries, scholars wondered, how could such a system exist? How could anyone control buying and selling across entire nations? How could worship be enforced on a global scale? It seemed impossible, too vast, too complex. But does it seem impossible now? Ask yourself these questions. What kind of mechanism could enforce worship worldwide without resistance? What kind of infrastructure could monitor every transaction across continents? What kind of enforcement tool could operate without hesitation, without bias, without mercy? A human army could rebel. Human enforcers could be persuaded. Human systems could fracture and fail. But machines do exactly what they are programmed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. They don't question orders. They don't feel sympathy. They don't change their minds. And Revelation 13 speaks of something else, something that puzzled interpreters for generations. An image that is given breath, an image that speaks, an image that causes consequences for those who refuse to bow. For most of human history, that sounded purely symbolic. How can an image speak? How can an image enforce anything? But we now live in a world of AI-generated voices, deepfakes, and holographic projections. Suddenly, an image that speaks doesn't sound symbolic anymore. It sounds technological. Now, here is where we must pause and consider something deeply important. When God created human beings, He placed something extraordinary within us, something that separates us from every machine ever built: a conscience, a moral compass, an internal witness, a quiet voice that whispers right and wrong, even when no one else is watching. That conscience is one of the most sacred gifts embedded into humanity. Throughout history, even in the middle of brutal wars, soldiers have spared enemies, not because of strategy, not because of orders, but because something inside them would not allow them to pull the trigger. There are documented moments where opposing fighters lowered their weapons, where captives were shown mercy, where lives were spared when they should have been taken. Why? Because of conscience. Because something within the human heart said, "This is wrong. I cannot do this." Even the most hardened person still carries that inner voice. The Bible speaks of a conscience that can be seared. It can be hardened. It can be numbed through repeated sin and rebellion. But even then, it still exists, buried, wounded, faint, but present. That is how God designed us. Now think about machines. Do machines have a conscience? Do robots wrestle with guilt before acting? Do algorithms feel conviction when they execute a command? No. They do not feel empathy. They do not experience compassion. They do not hesitate before causing harm. A machine does not lie awake at night burdened by regret. A machine does not pause and say, perhaps this person deserves grace. A machine does not struggle with moral tension. It simply executes instructions, cold, precise, calculated. If programmed to restrict access, it restricts access. If programmed to deny food, it denies food. If programmed to enforce compliance, it enforces compliance. Without question, without fatigue, without mercy. No inner conflict, no second thoughts, no moment of hesitation where compassion might break through. And this is what makes the rapid rise of autonomous systems so sobering. God placed conscience in mankind as a restraint on darkness. It is one of the last barriers between power and cruelty, between authority and abuse, between control and oppression. But what happens when we build systems that operate without that restraint? What happens when enforcement is handed to machines that feel nothing? What happens when the decision to deny someone food, or shelter, or medicine is made by code instead of conscience? Think about Revelation 13 again, a system that controls buying and selling, a structure that enforces worship, an authority that punishes refusal without exception. That kind of enforcement requires something cold, something without hesitation, something that will not be moved by tears or pleas or desperation. Human enforcers might break, they might show mercy, they might refuse an unjust order, but machines will never break. And that is exactly what makes them so useful for the kind of system the Bible describes. But here is what unsettles me most about everything we've discussed so far. It's not the robots themselves. It's not the technology. It's not even the speed of advancement. It's the reaction, or rather, the lack of reaction. When those humanoid robots performed on that stage in China, the world didn't gasp in horror. People didn't recoil in fear. They watched with fascination, with admiration, with applause. When that armed robot video circulated online, even before people knew it was fake, most didn't respond with alarm. They responded with curiosity, with interest, with a shrug that said, well, of course, this was always coming. And that normalization is exactly what concerns me. Because Revelation 13 doesn't describe a world that resists the beast system. It describes a world that marvels at it. Listen to what Scripture says. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Do you hear the tone of that verse? It's not terror. It's admiration. It's awe. It's fascination with power and capability. The world doesn't fight the system. The world celebrates it. And isn't that exactly what we're witnessing today? Technology enters our lives under the banner of convenience. Robots can assist with dangerous tasks. AI can streamline our decisions. Automated systems can reduce human error. It all sounds so reasonable, so helpful, so efficient. And much of it genuinely is beneficial. But here's the pattern we must recognize. And the same infrastructure that enables convenience can also enable control. The same systems that serve us today can surveil us tomorrow. The same technology that entertains us now can enforce compliance later. And we won't resist, because we will have already accepted it, already normalized it, already marveled at it. This is how deception works. It doesn't arrive with flashing warning signs. It arrives with applause, with amazement, with the slow drip of acceptance, until one day we look around and realize we didn't even notice the cage being built around us. Now, some might say, okay, robots are impressive, technology is advancing, but a global system of control? That still sounds far-fetched, does it? Let me ask you a few questions. 20 years ago, could you imagine a world where nearly every transaction is digital? Where cash is slowly disappearing? Where some countries are already testing government-controlled digital currencies? 20 years ago, Could you imagine a world where your face unlocks your phone, where airports scan your eyes, where your fingerprint grants access to your bank account? 20 years ago, could you imagine a world where every purchase you make is tracked? Every location you visit is logged. Every search you type is stored somewhere on a server. That world isn't coming. That world is already here. We are living in an age of digital currencies, biometric identification, centralized data systems, social credit scores in some nations, algorithmic decisions that determine what you see, what you buy, and what opportunities you receive. The infrastructure is being built, piece by piece, system by system. And most of us didn't even notice, because each piece arrived with a promise of convenience, faster payments, better security, personalized experiences. Who would resist that? But now, connect the pieces together. A cashless economy means every transaction can be monitored. Biometric identification means every person can be tracked. Centralized systems mean access can be granted or denied with the flip of a switch. Now add autonomous enforcement, machines that don't question, algorithms that don't feel, systems that execute commands without hesitation. What do you have? You have the framework for Revelation 13, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark. Previous generations read that verse and wondered, how? How could anyone control global commerce? How could anyone enforce such a system? But we don't have to wonder anymore. The technology exists. The infrastructure is growing. The pieces are falling into place. And most of the world is welcoming it with open arms. Now, after everything I've shared, you might be feeling uneasy, perhaps even fearful. And I understand that completely. But here is where I need to stop and tell you something absolutely essential. Prophecy was never given to paralyze believers with fear. It was given to prepare us with confidence. Yes, the world is changing rapidly. Yes, technology is advancing at breathtaking speed. Yes, systems are becoming more centralized, more connected, more capable of control. But none of this surprises God, not one bit. Human innovation does not threaten his throne. Artificial intelligence does not challenge his sovereignty. It's the rapid development of robotics does not catch heaven off guard. The same God who numbered the stars has numbered the days of this age. The same Lord who calmed the storm with a single word still rules over the storms of history. Let me remind you of something. The book of Revelation does not begin with chaos. It begins with a vision of Christ, standing among the lampstands, eyes like fire, voice like many waters, holding the keys of death and hell. And the book of Revelation does not end with darkness. It ends with victory, complete, total, unshakable victory. Yes, there are seals. Yes, there are trumpets. Yes, there are bowls of judgment, but every single one unfolds under divine permission. Nothing moves without God allowing it. Nothing accelerates beyond his control. History is not spiraling randomly into destruction, as it is moving intentionally toward divine fulfillment. So what should our response be? Not panic, not anxiety, not sleepless nights of dread. Our response should be watchfulness without fear, alertness without despair, sobriety without being shaken. The end of this age is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of something greater. The Lamb who was slain is eternal. His kingdom has no end. And while the systems of this world may rise and dazzle and intimidate, they are temporary. Every empire falls. Every beast system crumbles. Every throne built by man eventually turns to dust. But the throne of God remains forever. So when you see these things unfolding, the robots, the AI, the digital systems, do not let your heart be troubled. Let it be a reminder instead. A reminder that his return draws closer. And then that is not something to fear. That is something to hope for. So where does this leave us? We've seen robots leap from clumsy machines to precision performers in just 12 months. We've watched the world accept armed robots as inevitable, even when the footage was fake. We've traced the infrastructure being built around us: digital currencies, biometric tracking, centralized control, and we've connected it all to an ancient prophecy that suddenly feels less ancient by the day. But here's what I haven't told you yet. Everything we discussed today, the robots, the AI, the systems of control, this is only part of the picture. Because there's something else happening right now. Something most people have completely overlooked. Something that connects all of these technological advancements to a specific timeline. On a timeline that lines up with events unfolding in the Middle East at this very moment. And when you see how these pieces fit together, technology, prophecy, and current events, you'll understand why many believers sense that we are closer than we've ever been. I'll be revealing that connection in an upcoming video. But until then, remember this: the same God who showed us the end from the beginning is still on his throne, and he has not forgotten his people. Not for a single moment.